Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that Kluge-Ruhe and the Fralin Museum of Art, both museums of the University of Virginia, are located on the land of the Monica Nation. And we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And since we're all joining from locations around the world, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous nations where each of us are tuning in from. And I encourage you, if you don't know who those people or nations are, that you find out and that you learn more about them and their art and culture, especially this month, given that it's Native American Heritage Month. I am going to pass it off to my colleague, Lisa, who will introduce our event.
All right, good evening or good morning, depending on where in the world you are right now. I want to thank and welcome all of you for joining us at the 7th webinar in this series, where the Fralin Museum of Art and the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection, both art museums at the University of Virginia, are investigating art forms that don't typically show up in museums. We believe that there are many art forms that are culturally dense, deeply tied to identity, and formally and technically complex that deserve our attention. Often these are taken for granted because they are a part of our daily lives and aren't highlighted or labeled as deserving our full attention. So with the Art in Life, we are giving these art forms the attention they deserve. So with that, let's get started. I am really pleased to introduce our very first panelist of the evening, fashion hairstylist Amy Farid. Amy, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody out there. My name is Amy Farid, and I am a proud member of the Osage tribe and also a very proud hairstylist. And I love being a hairstylist. And I believe that hair is an art form, and hair is an expression of how you want the world to see you, or how you want to be seen, or, you know, however you express. And specifically as a hairstylist, that I work with models, celebrities, and I call, you know, regular paying clients, civilians, which I love working with all of those types of people too. You have the people like models, like you're seeing on the screen right now, where this is backstage at a fashion show. You know, they're getting paid sometimes to get their hair done. It's their job. You know, celebrities, it's their job to get their hair done to go to an opening. Clients are special in a way where they're paying me to, you know, they want their hair to be done. They want my creative eye. And so together it becomes a collaboration. And with a client, you collaborate on things, you know, or sometimes you have these clients that want you to just do what you will, right? Like, you know best, you know, or you have people that want more control in the matters. Again, the slides that are popping up now are from a show that I keyed for years called Hood by Air. And again, it's a collaboration with a bunch of different creative people. And that is also what is so fun about, you know, hair and as an art form, is that you're kind of building on people's visions of like, okay, I'm going to bring this, or the designer had this in mind. You know, the stylist had this in mind. Where do I fit in there? You know, and then we create something that lasts maximum 30 minutes, right? It's temporary. It's there, it's did it, we had our, you know, our whole experience, and then it's gone. And I also love that about this hair, about this medium, this form of art, because it is temporary, but it is, and that's why pictures are so beautiful, and you get to see these moments captured in time, or a fashion show that's captured. You know, there's some early Hood by Air shows that before Anna Wintour and everyone started coming and paying attention, that aren't captured, and it was before iPhones and before all that. And I wish we had that, but that experience will live on. But so you're seeing some slides here, some editorial shoots with, you know, again, collaborating with photographers, stylists, the model's energy too. I feed off of that kind of energy. Like I listen to the hair. I'm like, ooh, what can this hair do? Like, what can this give me? And a lot of times in my way, like what I love to do is graphic shapes within really soft. So like something very structural, but with the interior being really soft, or like a curl or like a finger wave. Like this is Desmond, and doing this very classic structured finger wave, and but it has a softness to it. So I love the balance of graphic and softness all in one. I try to do that a lot. It's a balance thing. I love balance. This is a photo shoot that was inspired by Aubrey Beardsley and Oscar Wilde and his story of Salome. So this is Herodia, and Queen Herodia, Salome's mother. And this was shot by photographer Jennifer Sarr, who's an amazing photographer. And it was a really beautiful shoot where we got to play with these Art Deco, themes and hair shapes. Like the shapes of things were, I was looking more at the shape of the art of that time too. And there's John the Baptist there after Salome beheaded him. And so this was a really fun shoot, and I thought it'd be fun. And this is Salome in all her glory. This is an artist, performance artist, boy child, for the cover of King Kong. And again, an artist that I got to collaborate with to build upon a larger picture. And I really love these photos that we captured. This was all in one day that we did. And that's the thing, in one day you do so many looks and you don't have a lot of time. People don't want to give you a lot of time to do hair or makeup. So you kind of have to get in. It's not like, I'm not like Caravaggio, or, I can't take my time to do something. I have to do it really fast, so it's really fun to do that. And these last pictures are of Florence Welch, who uses her hair when she performs so beautifully. So I wanted to add her in. I love doing her hair or undoing her hair, and the way that she throws it, and with her clothing too. It's so very poetic. So anyway, that was a little bit about me, and I think my time is up. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's a nice little snapshot.
Yeah.
We're going to go on to Mykey now. Mykey, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I can't see myself in the camera, so I hope I have it at the right angle. But hair for me, bringing hair into life is color. So I used to do a lot of session styling, and I started doing naturals about 15 years ago. And I've ventured into specializing in rainbow hair color. So the clients that come to me are often people that are wanting to show a representation or an extension of who they are and capture that essence in wearable art. And as Amy was saying, it is temporary. I feel like the art that I do on people is semi-permanently temporary, like it's hair color, so it does eventually fade out, but it is more of a commitment to someone's appearance to bleach your hair, because each style you have to bleach. The emoji that's on the screen now, we had to shave that out and bleach his whole mullet. And people come to me and get their vision, or they let me create my vision on them. This is Art Simone, a drag queen that I work with, one of my clients. Ironically, their Instagram name is Artist. So it also goes to show that drag performers, musicians, any kind of performing art is art. And it took me a lot of time to comprehend that I'm an artist, not a hairdresser. People used to say it a lot, and I'd be like, oh yeah, but I'm just a hairdresser, But it was a whole process to come to terms with the fact that I'm working with a color palette, I'm changing the way that people feel. And when people see the art, which is walking around on either my clients or drag performers or anyone that's wearing a wig out there, it creates a feeling when people see it, and it's people's intention that's been put into the expression of who they are. Like I get people that are transitioning from one gender to another or non-binary. So they'll get the transgender flag, or if it's around Pride Month, they'll get rainbows put in their hair for Pride. So it can really signify a lot of what's happening in someone's life. This wig is actually the first wig that I ever colored, and we auctioned it for a charity for Cancerland in America. I've also done a lot of like molding and shaping, which are more temporary art forms like Amy was saying. And that's from my session styling background, and I incorporated color with sculpture. So every haircut is a sculpture, every hairstyle is a shape and a sculpture. And then you add a painting palette in there as well. You've got 2 or 3 forms of art. You've got angles for haircuts. I did a rainbow road trip for Make-A-Wish, and we turned people's hair into burgers and pizzas and tacos, and there's a few slides of that. And that was really fun and temporary, but it was a way of like, there's the pizza there and all the ingredients that were made out of hair. I did all of them in my living room at home before coming to America. The taco shell there is actually her hair and a lot of hairspray after bleaching it and dyeing it yellow. So, you know, I am a hair artist. I don't feel like I'm a hairdresser anymore. I feel like that's kind of where I started at, and with progression, it's definitely an art form and needs to be recognized as an art in the world. I am also in the photo in the slides with the drip hair, and we literally use a paintbrush for that kind of work as well. So yeah, it really goes to show, like even the emoji's eyes, that's all done with a fine paintbrush, and I go to an art store to get the tools that I need to translate it into art on hair. The kid that has the drips hair, a couple of slides back, his reasoning for getting the rainbow drip hair was to create conversation around autism and being on the spectrum, because his brother is living on the spectrum, and you know, it doesn't always translate to pride, or like I have heterosexual male clients that get their bold rainbow beards just because that's what they want, and they love expressing that part of themselves. And I feel really lucky in my job to be able to get paid for doing what I love to do. I'm literally living a fairy tale, and that people get to see and appreciate it. And that's me at time.
Thank you so much, Mikey. We're gonna move on to Emma. And Emma, I'm gonna let you share your screen here.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I've really enjoyed seeing the spectacular artistic hair forms of the previous speakers. I'm going to be talking, in a sense, about a more hidden kind of artistry of hair. I'm really fascinated in how hair is, in some ways, the most intimate and personal fiber that we have, but at the same time, it can be detached. And when it comes to various hair products that come into the market and feed the fashion market, of course, the hair has been worked on elsewhere, and that's what I'm really interested in. So I've been working a lot on some of the untold stories of hair, where the artistry is often unrecognized and unseen. So I'm going to share some slides with you of examples of these untold stories, and I'm going to begin with a historic example. I've written a book called The Secret Lives of Hair, and I'm doing an exhibition which is about untold stories. So what I want to share today is 3 untold stories. So this is the story of invisible hairnets. Now, we all know about hairnets, but what you might not know is that sort of from the early 1900s until about 1940, most of these nets were actually made from human hair. And they, you know, if you imagine the work involved in that, tying these tiny little knots of human hair, and they were known as invisible nets because you couldn't really see them, they were so fine. Now, who was making these nets? We can think not just of invisible nets. I'm trying to get onto my next slide, and it's being a bit stubborn. It doesn't want to come. Let's see. No. Let's
You
see.
might just need to click on the screen, like on, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Not only was this invisible hair, but it was also, in some ways, we can think about invisible makers. Because when I started researching this, I could not find any images of people making these nets. And this is the only image I've ever been able to find, a very staged image of a woman from Alsace dressed in her Sunday best, demonstrating hairnet making in Selfridges. And you can see one of the hairnets up on the corner of the screen. But I want you to look at another sort of, in a sense, hidden aspect of this story. Because if you look at the hair that's lying on the table, it doesn't look like European hair. It's thick, dark, straight hair. And when we look at where the hair is coming from, that hair is in fact coming from China. And it's mostly coming from men's plaits. Now, men would go to have their plaits done by the barbers, and the barbers had the right to keep any hair that fell out of those plaits. So those long strands of hair that are falling out of the plaits are actually what are feeding into these, you know, glamorous, fashionable hair nets that are being worn by women in America and Europe and so on. And you can see one of them at the top, how incredibly intricate it is, because we're talking about this knotting of these individual strands of hair. Now, what's interesting, it never mentions, or almost never mentions, that the hair is from China on these envelopes in which they're sold. You know, these are envelopes, they emphasize that it's human hair, but they often say that it's sterilized, or it's, it's natural and so forth, but they don't like to mention where that hair is coming from. And of all the envelopes I found, only one actually says at the bottom, made in China. And what we see here, in fact, if you go further into this story, another hidden element is that by about 1912, almost all of these nets were actually being made in China. And by 1920, there was a workforce of 500,000 women and children making these hairnets for the Western market. And this is a story that has more or less sort of been effaced. And it was only when I went to China, to Qingdao, I had the privilege of being let into a little tiny private hair museum, and I actually saw this bale of nets, delicate as sort of spiders' webs, and there was a picture of a lady who had, in her youth, made those nets for the Western market. So that story about hair nets is a story of how Western fashions have very often depended on the hidden artistry and skills of people elsewhere who haven't been recognized at all in history. And of course, this is not just an old story, because if we think of the hair extension market, and I'm shifting now to the present, and we're in Chennai in the office of a hair extension company, Raj International in Chennai, you can see the hair extensions. And of course, we also can think of all the hidden work that is going on in the background to produce the hair for the market, with the use of hands, with the use of feet, and all the different skills and care involved in making hair extensions. So you can see the hackling of hair, you can see the stitching by machine. The lady at the bottom with the black board is actually picking out any white hairs or any sort of errant things. You also have people picking out lice and things like that, so that these products can enter the market. And here you have people actually wefting hair, making hair wefts by hand. So it's a very, very intricate work, and huge labor forces involved in this kind of work. If we think about the changing of hair texture, you know, how do you produce curly hair out of straight hair? And here you can see the winding around aluminium poles, and this hair is baked to get these beautiful textures, and you can see them coming off the poles here. And where's this hair coming from? Most of this hair in this particular factory is actually coming from temples, Hindu temples, where people will have made a vow to have their heads shaved before going to worship their god. And that hair is auctioned off into the international market. You can see it in great sacks down below. And when it comes into the factory and is washed, it looks quite uniform. But out of that uniformity, all these different types of hair texture are actually produced. So what we're seeing here then is sort of behind the scenes of the hair that is actually sort of consumed in the West and also in Africa. And my last hidden hair story is about concealing loss. What happens if you don't have any hair and you want to have a custom made wig? Very often it's too expensive to have it made, say in England or United States. So you might actually have your details taken in the country where you are. This is in England, where someone's having their head template measured. And all the decisions about the hairpiece that they require are actually made in England. So this requires choosing, you know, the hair texture, the density of the hair, the type of curl, the color of the base, and you can see these templates below where the shading is marked out and the parting, and all those details are marked out in England, and then they are sent to China, where they are translated into Chinese. So you can see them translated along with a little cling film hair template. And then you see that work being distributed into factories in China. This factory is in Qingdao, and you can see down the side people, you know, boiling and dyeing, you know, very specific hair requirements for specific hair pieces. So these are in that box down below. You've got the head templates of lots of different American men, it so happens, you know, all of whom their hair pieces and their specific requirements are all in that box down there. And you see people blending the hair and doing that very delicate work, of course, of what they call ventilating, knotting the wigs by hand. So there's an incredible amount of work and artistry that happens behind the scenes in a very kind of unacknowledged way, but which enters into the Western market and around the world. And what, of course, is important to remember, hair is so intimate when it's on the head, it becomes just mere fiber when people are working with it in this way, but it becomes intimate again when it's worn, which is something that came across so strongly in those first presentations. And I just wanted to end with an artwork by one of the people who's participating in the exhibition that I'm co-curating, which is called Hair, Untold Stories. And Saskia Ross, this wonderful piece, The Many Faces of Alopecia, which is really also her reflections in lockdown about what it is to have alopecia, to wear a wig, and how she doesn't only look different when she wears a wig, but she actually feels like a different person and behaves differently when she wears it. So that relationship, that complicated relationship between the self and the hair, which we've already heard a bit about from our previous speakers, is what I want to end with here, and I think might be nice for moving on towards Adrianne's work. So thank you, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Emma. That's a great little introduction. I'm sure we'll explore more on that topic. Adrianne, we're off to you.
Hello. Oh, I'm just soaking it all in, listening to all the different stories and experiences. I appreciate being on this panel of great artists. So I draw what I see, what I feel, what I know. My art is my voice, and that is also what I teach my scholars. But I would say the one thing that you will see through all of my work is hair. I have this great relationship with hair. I am an expert wig wearer, and I like to switch my hair up often. If you come into my school, my students will tell you probably within the week, they may see 5 different hairstyles, just depending on how I feel. I change it like I change my clothes. It is my attitude reflected through my hair. If I'm tired, my hair may look one way. if I want to draw a certain type of energy from hair, I may feel wear something different. If I want to feel powerful, it may be big. If, you know, it just depends. And that's kind of what you will see in my artwork. I celebrate hair, especially hair of African Americans, because the way I grew up, my grandmother was a beautician. And so it was always about straightening that hair out. It had to be pressed or permed, and it needed to be forced to stay a certain way. It had to be obedient, you know? And so I went through a lot of what I probably would think about was like torturous moments under the heated dryer, or maybe getting it braided. But now I get to choose. You know, as an adult, I get to choose if I want to wear color, or I get to choose if I want to celebrate and wear my natural hair that grows from my scalp. I get to choose if I want to put those chemicals on it, but it's all reflective and it's self-expressive. And that is the great thing about hair. It is an art. It's an art form. It's exactly right. You can sculpt it and you can mold it, and you can just kind of make it do whatever it is that you want it to do. You can allow it to be completely free. You'll see in my artwork, I use lots of lines and shapes, specifically this one. This is a part of a jazz series, actually. It focuses on women in jazz, and instead of focusing on features, which I do a lot of people, and I love to paint lips and nose and all of those features, but I really love hair because it grows so differently. Textures are different. They say good or bad, not good or bad. There's fine, and then there's soft, there's thick, and you have tight curls, and then you have looser curls. And I just try to express that in my artwork through line, through shape, the playfulness of it, the thickness of it, the crown. It's a crown. It makes you feel powerful, or it can make you feel beautiful. And I just try to express that through my artwork. I try to celebrate the differences that you see in all the various types. It can be as playful as those two puffs that you see there, and how the light reflects off of it. It may be two-toned, not because you dyed it, but it's just a natural thing, or it may blow in the wind. You may decide to add some of that hair that belongs to some of those people from the Hindu temple, or not. And even the way men like cut their hair and shape their hair, and whether or not they want it to be plaits or braids or twists or locks. I just try to celebrate that through color and line and shape in artwork. So yeah, it's the same, self-expression. And so that's pretty much what you'll see in my artwork, especially this one. This one's a popular one amongst women. They love to see the masculine features of the man, but they like to see the softness of the flowers, or the way his hair is coiled and pinned up. So just celebrating whoever you are, what that looks like for you is what you'll see in my artwork.
Thank you so much, Adrianne. Gosh, we went in so many directions. You've all touched on so many interesting topics already, some of which I definitely wanted to explore, and some of the moderated questions. So thanks to each of you so much. You know, it was interesting for me to hear each of you in different ways using what I consider sort of like fine art / art historical terminology to describe hair, which exemplifies exactly what we're getting at today. Some of you talked about, you know, hair as sculpture and sculpting hair. You all talked about shape. You talked about a palette that you're using with hair, and also this idea of like the temporary nature of hair being almost like performance art. You know, I think Amy, you talked about how like sometimes it only lasts for 30 minutes. And so I just wanted each of you to sort of maybe narrow in on that idea of sort of this terminology, that like how much does sort of art world, like, or language that we think of being characterized or being belonging to the art world being applied to what you all are each doing, or to hair as a practice. Maybe that's a little bit opaque, but anybody want to start on that?
Yeah,
one?
that's a good one. Can I start on that one? I've got something that comes to mind. I think like when people are choosing a hair color, it's like whether they want it soft or bold or pastel, or like these are all kind of how diluted is the color, like what amount of white or neutral would you mix with that to create the shade, and also how long they want it to last as well. We're talking about it being temporary, like you would go bold and strong and like out there and loud if you wanted to make a statement, but if someone wanted something softer, you'd go a little bit more pastel, and it's going to come out in 2 washes.
So that idea of saturation.
Saturation is the
informing
word. Yeah.
practice. Yeah, that's really interesting. Cool.
I also wanted to touch on, the terminology. It's like, I live in New York, so I'm doing a lot of creatives, people's hair. So my references are art references. I'm highly inspired by art as a whole, so that terminology is it goes in and out between, we're throwing out, okay, this person looks, her face, her structure, her bone structure is giving me Lempicka. You know what I mean? Like I have this amazing client who I just did the other day, and Lempicka is like one of my favorite artists. And especially for hair, the way she drew hair is impeccable. And so like I have those references in me. And I'm not saying just people who live in New York, because even growing up in Kansas and Oklahoma, I was developing this eye through the art world, as you would say, through painting and sculpture. And so we do use those terminologies because it is what inspires us, like that art, that expression inspires us. So I don't know if that's what you were asking, but I heard a little bit of that, but yeah. and
No,
if my clients, like when they come, like I make sure, or, whatever highly conceptual shoot that I'm working on, we're always referencing someone, or some kind of a bit of that. So,
And you also mentioned, Amy, in your introduction that you were asked to sort of make Art Deco hair, or like for the hair to reflect like Art Deco as a style, and then in our historical movement. So seems like there's lots of connections there too, given that you're working with creatives so much. That's really interesting.
yes.
Does Emma or Adrianne, did you want to respond to that one?
I was going to say, I don't think there is anything that exists in life that doesn't have some aspect of art. Everything is motivated, persuaded, influenced by art. You can't have advertisement without color, line, shape. And those are just basic like elements of art. So I don't think it's hair and then art. I think it's all art.
Yeah.
I love that. It gets right at like the quote that guided the whole creation of this program. So like this idea that there is no distinction between these two things.
Yeah.
Emma, did you want to add to that? I think you're muted.
I was just going to say, I would very much agree with that in many ways. And at the same time, if we look historically at sort of what, art institutions have taken seriously or museums have taken seriously, very often hair arts haven't been taken seriously. And actually, if we look at the historical record, very often wigs are something that's mocked, the absurd excess that women are kind of, getting carried away by the wrong things, or men. And, and that their priorities are kind of wrong. And I was really struck by how something like those hairnets, they fascinated me because they just slipped out of history somehow.
Emma,
maybe not. Yeah.
There's an artist, and I cannot find her name, but there's an artist that I met at an open studios, and she makes art out of hair. And It's
Wow.
incredible. I have to send you her work. It's
Okay,
all
that'd be-
hair for hair tied,
Yeah, yeah.
huge pieces. It's
Well,
incredible.
there's quite a lot of contemporary artists who use hair as an art form. And that's one of the things that
Yeah.
also really fascinates me is hair as a fiber, you know, what it
Yeah.
represents, because it's so kind of evocative to people. And many people are quite shocked by detached hair, probably not you as hairstylists because you're used to it, but and people who wear wigs frequently are used to it too, but many
Yeah.
people are quite creeped out by it, and a lot of artists play with that slightly uncanny nature of hair, that it's kind of both alive but dead at the same time, and all the rest
Yeah.
of it. And one of the things that really interested me looking at talking to people who worked with hair is, and I'd be really interested to know what stylists think about that, because that hair is not a standardized thing, you know, that everybody's hair is slightly different. And of course, for people working behind the scenes in the wig industry, that's often a cause of frustration because they can't produce a standardized product, and they're sort of amazed that hair that looks the same and you stick it in a dye vat, it behaves differently. And I just wondered how you all experience that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Emma, because I order a lot of wigs for my work.
Yeah.
And the quality of the hair ranges, and I guess that's just the supply of what I order my wigs from China.
Yeah.
And I think before that the hair comes from Korea.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is very, very different every time with the quality or the texture. Like sometimes it might be a bit frizzier, it might be a bit smoother, it might be a lower density, and it all just comes down to the process of what you explained in your slides. But to add on to that, I'd also like to say, like, it's interesting how hair itself can be the medium for artists.
Yeah.
Like it can be pliable and moldable, but it can also be a canvas as well. Like in my circumstance, like using it as a canvas for painting.
Yeah.
But it can just be used in so many ways and art forms.
I always say that too with hair colorist. Like one of my best friends is this incredible hair colorist, and you know, watching her paint, and it's very painterly, and then me with my hands, like it's more sculpturally.
Yeah.
Word. So it's kind of like, you know, me like molding and shaping and cutting hair with a razor, or like, you know, it gives a sculpture kind of vibe to it. And definitely with people who color hair, it is that. And you guys are masters at color theory, and it's just, yeah, it's very painterly in that way.
And scientific. And scientific.
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, because you know they don't like to give us our credit as artists, you know. In the academic world, if you're in art or music, or we're just kind of like the glorified babysitters a little bit. But you know, there's some science there. You have to have a little bit of intellect too. But you guys are talking about the versatility of hair, and I think about my hair or my children's hair because I have 4, and all come from me. Very different hair, right? Or my hair, if it's dry, I can pick it and it will stand straight up. Or I can wet it and it will curl up. Or I can blow it out and add heat and I can straighten it out. Just so it's just very versatile, just even in those processes. The whole process to a silk press is an artistry.
I know that's right. I know that is alchemy. Like that, when you have one texture, you're going completely to the opposite.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I find that too with using, like, I use a very small crimper to get like a very textured result, and then it makes the hair so moldable. You would find that too as well, Amy, with your work with session styling. Like if you have dead straight hair and you need to like sculpt it up into a shape, just using a micro crimper.
Yes. No, because that crimp creates air. So it creates the volume. So it makes it easier. Yes. Emma, I wanted to ask you, there was a slide that you had where the hair was on a rope and it had silver rods. That was perming it, or what was that?
So they were making straight hair into curly hair, basically.
hair, okay.
And that is either baked or steamed in.
Yeah.
And there's all these different sort of textures
Wow.
that can be made.
Yeah,
And
because,
obviously
yeah,
I went
the
into a lot of
steam, definitely if
factories in
it's
China where you saw that a lot. Yeah.
synthetic hair, because there's synthetic and then there's the human hair.
That was human hair.
Synthetic, yeah, with synthetic, you can't really, you steam the curl in. But you know, it's funny, and I'm sure you guys know about this too. Like when you get a pack of hair and it will be like, ooh, the Brazilian one, right? The Brazilian one is like a little bit wavy. You know, she ain't from Brazil. Like she's from, that's Indian hair. Cause you know, I have Indian clients, like, okay, she's from the temple. And then you have the Asian hair, the Korean hair, or the Chinese hair. Like this is Chinese, you know what I mean? Working with clients in actual human beings, you see like, oh, I see where this hair is from. You know, but
there's a huge amount of mislabeling in the industry, I have to say. So you know, for example, in China, I met someone who was specialized in Peruvian hair, but all his hair was coming from Myanmar. But it's sold as that. So that is something, yes, to be aware of.
Brazilian, silky, it's a whole,
That's so interesting how like sort of race and nationalities attached to certain hair types, even though that's like really arbitrary, right? It's really and there's so much diversity. Like what does it mean for like what does it mean for hair to be Peruvian, really? Like when there's so much diversity among, like, I don't know, that those
absolutely
it's really
it's the fictions of the hair trade
based on stereotypes.
It is stereotypes.
And some of it is a little bit is the texture, which is also another art term, right? The texture,
totally.
It can be super thin, or it can have a natural kind of crinkle to it. The thickness or the denseness of it. So like if I want a wig, or if I want a sew-in or something like that, I want it to be full and luscious, right? So there's just a certain type of hair that I'm gonna look for, and it only may come from a certain type or group of people.
I mean, it's interesting that the hair nets, the people who are making the hair nets in the textile industry would say they would only use Chinese hair because the Chinese hair had a very thick cuticle layer. So it was actually more resilient, but still had some sort of flexibility. And they tried everything else, including yak hair. And yak hair has been used for wigs and actually makes really nice kind of yucky textured hair. Because it has body and frizz.
The artist that I met who uses her hair single strand, she's Korean. And it was just amazing to see these nets, which in Paris they sell nets that are really fine. And I never realized that those were probably inspired by the human hair nets, because in America the nets are a little bit thicker, and in Paris, they're really, you can get ones that are really fine. And I'm sure that has to do, that's so amazing.
I love this conversation. I'm even like sad to jump in. But I wanted to just, because you all touched on it, I just wanted to go back to this conversation of how personal hair is and how obviously like our DNA is in our hair. And a lot of you talked about sort of hair as empowering, or not having hair as affecting confidence and how people feel differently. Can you each just sort of talk a little bit? I just would love to hear the four of you talk about that. Like why do we feel, why do you all each think that like hair is so personal and intimate and sort of like delicate and fragile as it connects to how we self-identify?
I think one aspect is sorry. Did you want to speak, Adrianne?
No, I was just saying, it's your crown and your glory. It frames your face, right? You change your hair, you change the entire person. When I was working on the Black Lives Matter mural, typically my hair can be a lot to deal with. My natural hair, it's very thick and it's curly, and you know, you just have a lot of processes. And so I tend to go with adding hair in because it's easier, right? But for this moment, I was very proud. And so I released my hair. My hair is who I am. Why would I hide my hair when this was a moment for me to stand in who I am and be proud of who I am? And so it was about releasing that hair out and wearing and letting it dry out and picking it, you know, and letting it be as big and as free as it could be, because it was about being free in that moment. So I just think it's absolutely who you are. It's how you feel in that moment. It's what you want to project to the world.
Yeah.
I love that, Adrianne. And especially as a Black woman who in this country, actually around the world, having natural textured hair hasn't always been acceptable and still isn't. So whenever I see a woman wearing her hair natural, it just makes me like, yes, like representation matters, natural hair matters. And in the workplace, in conservative work areas and conservative areas, that needs to be accepted. And that is your crown, and it is beautiful. All hair texture is incredible and beautiful. And that's why I love it. And, you know, hair, it grows back. You can mess it up. We've all done it, right? Someone's done it. And you know what? It grows back. It's magical. It's amazing. You know, people, we can control that. You know, women can feel a certain way. Men, you know, non-binary people have this amazing thing that grows from their head, and they can change it and they can feel incredible. And that is what's so beautiful about hair. Like having someone sit in your chair and you just taking the time with them and seeing what their vibe is, what you're trying to get. And they might not be in a right state of mind. And that, as someone, as a hairstylist like that I am, I take that into, I'm reading their energy. Like, what are they going through? Did they just break up with someone? Why are you trying to cut your hair off? You know what I mean? There's a lot that goes into that. After doing hair over 20 years, you develop these skills as a little bit of a mind reader, a little bit of a psychic. You know, maybe it's not your hair. Maybe you need to take a pottery class. You know what I mean? There's a lot. But for hair, it grows back.
So there's like a relational component, and also this like with the client as the artist. But then also I hear you saying that there's like this like there's magical qualities of it. Which is really wonderful. And Emma, that actually reminds me of a moment in your introduction when you were talking about how like the hair stops being intimate when it's being like processed, and then like when the wearer puts it back on, it reignites with some part of who that person is, which is like
exactly it becomes reanimated basically on somebody else's head, and that's what I find really extraordinary about the hair industry, because the hair is moving. It's not just moving big geographical areas, but it's moving from completely different cultural contexts, but it becomes reanimated and it becomes intimate again. And I think that's what I loved hearing Adrianne talking about, how the wigs can also be an intimate part of the self, you know, that you redefine yourself through that. And that's what I was also trying to show in that artwork about alopecia. And just to add to that, one of the things that I found really interesting working in did some research in the Orthodox Jewish community, where women wear wigs to cover their hair on marriage, and talking to the wig makers there. Some of them, what they were doing was they were actually taking some of the person's own hair and incorporating it into the wig in order to sort of reconnect, so that people didn't feel too kind of detached from the wig, that it could have recreated that really intimate thing. And what Amy was talking about the role of the stylist in kind of as a therapist in many ways, as well as a stylist. I mean, and that's what is so amazing about hairdressing, I think, is that it is an art form that's very hands-on, but at the same time, it is also dealing with human beings and their psychological and social and their sense of well-being in the world, really. And that combination is really interesting, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. And like for me, with my brand is Unicorn Mains, and I only deeply thought about this morning when I got asked the question of how art is life. When you think of a unicorn, it's a mystical character that is drawn on paper as art. And that is what, when I started Unicorn Mains, I was like, how do I describe what this is? Like, what is what I do? Like, how can I translate that into a brand? And my first client was My Little Pony. Like, I literally did 400 mains for My Little Pony, which is a cartoon, which also comes back to art. And like what you're saying about the wigs is like, I've done performing art as well, and we do character work, and you put a wig on and you are a different character. So when people feel different in a wig, this whole energy comes through them. And that is also a
Yeah.
form of expression, temporary because it's acting, but also in my work, it can make people feel like that. Like I do wigs for drag queens, for musicians, for um, all walks of life. So for me personally, though, to answer that question, Lauren, is like I used to color my hair to feel socially accepted. I'm from a small town, from a coastal town, so I used to blend in, and I thought it was hot. I thought it was attractive to, blend in and just have this stereotypical look of how a man is supposed to look for me personally. And I thought there's no way I could express who I wanted to be, which is what you see now today, which I have no shame around. But I think that is for a lot of people as well, for any kind of major hair change. And like what you said, Amy, like sometimes people are going through something and it's like they're lightening out the past of whatever's been going on for them and stepping into a new sense of self. And that's really empowering. I did, when we had the postal survey around marriage equality here in Australia, which was quite late, it was 2017. I offered for people to come in and have their hair dyed rainbow that didn't have the right to vote. So people that were under 18 or people that weren't residents of Australia. And just people wearing, like, I'm always rainbow, but people would come up and be like, oh, I know what you're voting, or like, oh, I love your yes. And that is a form of, it's an extension of who I am. And I mean, like, I'm going to a funeral today, and I used to have to like, oh, maybe I'm too this or too that, and dull it down and put a temporary color on it. Like I did that for my uncle out of respect, but like even my friend was a part of the arts committee for our primary school, so I've recently reconnected with her and everything, but it just feels so good to just be able to be yourself in no matter what circumstance, or not feel like you have to blend in.
And can I just say that seeing you and anybody with rainbow colored hair, that if that does not make you feel something
Happy.
beautiful, like you are, I don't know, you need to return somewhere else, but like that makes me so happy looking at you and your hair and your beard. Like your work is incredible, and it's just
Thanks. You
so
too.
happy. Like I love
happy.
it. Very positive.
Yeah.
Yes,
All the good vibes.
Yes, I completely agree. And we do have a question in the Q&A that I want to address because it's actually going to take us in a bit of a different direction. But there's a comment that I have to also address because it's personal to me. Someone said that she sees images with gray hair, and because hair also plays a role in aging, particularly for women, because there's this gray hair movement right now, which I decided to embrace my gray, my silver, my white a few years ago. And it's empowering, but it like with everything else, it's who we are. And it's part of that self-expression and taking just some pride that this is part of the process of, and it's okay. It's a good thing. So anyway,
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
Growing out your hair, and your hair is beautiful and silver. And I love that. Like any woman or person who is like, wants to grow their hair out, especially I feel like women, because we do get this, you know, with grays, or we look old, you know, because women can't look old and be beautiful, or, you know, this, all this stuff that the world puts on us.
Right. It's
such a
marketing-
beautiful statement, right? To be like, yeah, I have this amazing white hair that's natural, that's growing out of my hair, and cool.
We just need to, we need to embrace it. So I encourage the movement to continue.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right.
And there are
So-
Facebook groups for people supporting people that are going through the process.
Right. It's all over Instagram, and yes, I follow them.
Yeah, it's great.
All right. So this question that we have is going to really take us in a bit of a different direction, but they are asking if you can talk about the economics of hair, and they expressed that when you were talking about the women in India and how their hair was donated to temples and the temples profited, but they did not. So the question is, how does the hair industry address inequity in pay, and who gets the crown glory of the profits?
The hair industry is a very unequal industry. A lot of the people who are working in it get very little money. But what's interesting about women going to the temples is they go there, and men and children, they go there for a religious purpose. They do not go there to get money. And if they were paid money for that hair, it would defeat the object of the gesture of sacrifice that they are doing in having their heads shaved. So that's really important to understand there. But of course, there's a lot of hair that's coming into the industry is not coming in through temples. It's coming in either through people selling their hair, sometimes for a particular project they want to pursue, but very often out of poverty, and unsurprisingly. There's also a very big trade in hair that is fallen hair. So when people brush and comb their hair, if it's long hair, they keep the combings. And after you've got about a year's worth of combings, you have a whole ball like this, and you can sell it into the industry. And that actually makes up a very large proportion of the hair trade. So all the cheaper hair products are likely to come from combings. So that is kind of waste hair that would otherwise go into the waste stream that actually gets recuperated and used in the industry. So in some ways you can say the people who are selling that hair are making something out of nothing, because otherwise it would be thrown away. But you also have to look at the labor conditions of the people who are untangling that comb waste, which I did not show today, but which I have written about quite extensively, because they are earning very, very low wages. That said, they're also working very often in very poor areas where it does provide some kind of income, that is an improvement on what they can earn through farming or whatever in that particular area. So it's quite a complicated area, but on the whole, for sure, people who are working in factories and workshops are not the people who are making much money. Although the Indian factory, I should specify that the two factories I showed were actually some of the factories which did treat their workers quite well. But it's a completely unregulated industry, and therefore there's enormous inequality in it. And if somebody tries to persuade somebody to sell their hair and says, your hair's, it's rubbish, it won't make any money, and this and that and the other, they can sort of dupe somebody into selling their hair for very little money. And there's no regulation of that. So, it's a completely pertinent question to ask. And it's something that I've, written about in my book, really, that side of the industry.
Wow.
But what I also wanted to show today is the artistry and skills as well, because it's very easy to just see things through one lens. And it's also important to recognize, what people are doing and achieving as well. And people may be improving their livelihoods. And interestingly, really in-depth historical work about hairnet making has shown that those people who were making them, that early slide I showed of people, Europeans making them, they did actually really improve their lives through doing that work, even if it was very labor intensive, work. So, it's a complicated area.
I love the juxtaposition of in India, and I know that people that go to the temples, I know that is something that they do not for money.
Yeah.
But that hair that's taken from, given and brought here or wherever in the world to who knows what, what I mean? Like, I feel like some hair have energy in it, it has energy to it. And, sometimes when people want to cut their hair, they need to let go of some energy that's there, that's been there for a long time. But I was thinking of that in the temple, the women that and men that give their hair in the temple, and then it goes from this like really beautiful religious thing into who knows what, you know. And that's why
people can feel quite exhilarated about having their heads shaved in that context, you know, because they've traveled far. It's usually a gesture of sort of thanks to the god in relation to something good that's happened in their lives. So in fact, if you think about energies, it's probably good energy that would be in that hair, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, everybody, this has been so fascinating. There are no more audience questions at the moment, so unless something comes up right away, I think we'll close. But I love all the directions this has gone. Just from, we've touched on so many different, gone down so many different paths in such a short amount of time. And I'm just so grateful. I feel like I've learned a lot too. And there's also been like this spirit of celebration tonight, which is really wonderful. So I'm sure
everyone's passion has come through so strongly. It's I think we all feel so close to our hair, and your passion for what you do with it is really apparent.
Yeah. A big thank you to all of our panelists again, and all of you who attended. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having us. It's been really fun.
Yes, thank you.
It has. Yeah. Very nice to meet everybody.